everything in the synthetic world comes from the barrel of oil. So the Persian Gulf's a big producer of chemicals. They're a big producer. Their refineries produce feedstocks for the other chemical plants around the world, and they sell oil to other refineries that make feedstocks for other chemical plants. So there's multi-layer shortages here, and almost everything in the Persian Gulf is shut down right now because they ran out of places to store things. So whether facilities were damaged or not, there's just no place to start up those plants until we move that inventory out of the Gulf that's kind of backed up there. I would say, I call it, we've bricked up the production cycle there in the Persian Gulf.
Hey, John, so, the big million, billion, trillion-dollar question, of course, is when this war is officially over and things start to get back to quote-unquote normal. But let's say that this, what feels like progress in talks between the United States and Iran, and things calming down, it feels like it's happening, but we know things can turn on in a moment's notice. But having said that, if that's indeed the case, how quickly do these facilities, as you said, multi-level shortages, how quickly do these facilities get up and running? I keep going back to this one stat that's just stuck in my mind about Qatar and LNG, that, responsible for 30% of global capacity, and that it's going to take like 3 to 5 years to fix the damage that's been done. But you're the expert. Tell us about how quickly things kind of get back to normal.
Well, even if there's been no damage there, you may remember Winter Storm Uri that we had in the U.S. Gulf Coast a few years ago, and we shut down most of the U.S. Gulf Coast capacity. It took us a few months to get everything restarted here in the U.S. with everything going fine. These plants just don't turn back on by throwing a switch here. You have to inert all the pipelines and vessels with nitrogen gas, because when you turn on the motors and pumps, you might get a spark. We don't store any nitrogen gas. It's made daily by the gas company, so there isn't enough nitrogen gas to restart all the capacity all at once, the same way there wasn't here in the U.S. And again, we have to move the inventory that's in the Gulf out of the Gulf, and we have to bring new ships into the Gulf before we can start those plants up, because we have no place to put the product right now.
So I mentioned
it's going to take.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say through the third quarter, maybe into year end. I don't think anybody really knows, but it's months. That's why Dow is going to be raising prices again, May 1, maybe June 1, maybe July 1.
Yeah. Okay. Carol, were you going to say something?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is, once prices go up, do they really ever go down? I mean, the market dictates what happens, right? Certainly in the face of competition. But give us, we keep talking about energy prices kind of maybe leveling off at a certain point because of some global dynamics maybe going forward. But what about for the chemical industry?
Well, again, I would say oil sets the cost curve for most of these basic petrochemicals. And the futures market, at least, is predicting that oil doesn't go all the way back down to 60 or 65. So when we do come back down, we probably don't go all the way back down to where we were pre-conflict here. But I would say on average takes about 4 months for pricing to peak, and then it will stay plateaued until we actually start to get things restarted. So we haven't peaked yet, and we may stay at a plateau, towards the latter part of this year.
I mentioned just a handful of the companies that you cover. Those include PPG and Sherwin-Williams. And we like to look at those companies just in a different way, I imagine, than you do, just for demand for paint, for example, and the way that consumers are thinking about projects and as a measure of how consumers are thinking about the economy. How are those specific companies affected by these higher input costs?
Well, it'll mostly be there, and it's not Sherwin-Williams because they're primarily domestic. But PPG is one of the larger architectural paint companies in Australia, for example. And I think Asia is expected, anywhere that you hear about jet fuel shortages or gasoline shortages, it's the same place you're probably going to hear about chemical and plastic material shortages. So we have to bring demand down to balance with the reduced supply. So we're going to rationing pricing. Industries that can pay a high price will get product, and industries that can use substitutes are going to move into other materials. So we're going to package more paint in metal pails, for example. We're going to use more paper instead of plastic packaging. We're going to blend more natural fibers into clothing instead of synthetic fibers. So that's how we're going to bring, high prices will cause people to use other materials and will bring the demand for the chemicals down.
I can read Carol's mind. I know she's looking at a Lululemon story.
It's like there's lights that go off in my head, or maybe it's because I'm wearing yoga pants. Don't tell anybody at this moment. But, John, one of the stories that really caught our attention was Lululemon, this Texas investigation into their clothing for the presence of basically PFAS, these forever chemicals. I mean, increasingly, will we see this pushback and more chemicals being taken out of the system, especially when it comes to plastics? I know in my own house, whether it's microwaving and not doing, putting plastic going to glass increasingly. I mean, are we really seeing this pushback and the momentum growing?
Well, that's a whole separate issue. PFAS, not a Persian Gulf issue. And there really only been 2 PFAS molecules that have been banned. PFAS is a generic term for lots of fluorine-based chemistry that's there. And if we had cheaper substitutes, we'd be using them. And Lululemon and others have found some cheaper or competitive substitutes for certain applications. But the vast majority of PFAS molecules don't have replacement products here. So we're going to have PFAS chemistry around for a long time here. Everybody would like everything to be all natural and to have zero chemicals in any detection that's there, but zero is not possible, and there's not enough natural materials in the world to satisfy all our basic needs.
Well, unless we cut back on consumption, right? Or you're not even saying that. I mean, it would be just we're so dependent on it.
Well, as I said, we're going to go back to some steel pails for paint. We're going to go back to paper. Everybody remembers the ham in your refrigerator didn't last as long when it was wrapped in paper from the deli. We have it in plastic because it improves the shelf life of food. So that we can temporarily substitute backwards that's there, but I don't think the world wants to go backwards. I think we want to go forward.
Any of the companies in your portfolio that just aren't affected by this or are immune to this?
Yeah, actually, and one of the biggest specialty chemical areas is electronic chemicals. So we cover Corning as a specialty glass company. Yeah. We cover Integris semiconductor chemicals. Qnity Electronics was spun off from DuPont recently. That's printed circuit board and semiconductor chemicals, and Element Solutions. So these companies are doing great right now.
Do you have a favorite in the space?
Yeah, our top pick right now is Element Solutions, which is an electronic chemicals company, printed circuit board and semiconductor chemicals. And the CEO is about to receive an award here in New York in April. They'll actually be at the Mizuho Tech Conference coming up in June that's there. So chemistry crosses over with all of the end markets that are served. So we have a lot of crossover stocks. When you mentioned Sherwin before, there were housing analysts, building materials analysts, and retail analysts that would look like that. So chemicals invades all the end markets.
I'll ask the other question, least favorite, but you have 3 underperforms: Huntsman, Orion, and Tronox Holdings. Talk about those.
Well, actually, we recently added to that. So CF Industries, which is an ammonia chemical producer. Ammonia is one of the big Middle East chemicals. It's made from natural gas that's there. Iran was a big producer. Prices have soared, but the U.S. planting season's already well underway. We're going to pretty soon come out of the seasonal peak. The U.S. actually becomes a net exporter of ammonia after about May, and so we think those prices for ammonia are going to come down pretty hard, and we have a sell on CF Industries right now.